Welcome to another Warmaster's Workshop tutorial. We're going to be doing a tutorial on helmet refurbish and repairing some minor issues with helmets that can be anything from 3D print lines to cracks in 3D printed helmets to paint issues and that kind of thing. Mostly to tackle those times when you might buy a used helmet from somebody who's selling a helmet that's already in a finished state, and then going back and basically making it your helmet. So taking the paint back down to the base, repainting it from scratch, and filling any defects that might have happened on the previous ownership. So we have a helmet here in front of us, and I'm just going to show some quick things that we're going to be, or just kind of go over an overview here of the things that we're going to be really focusing on as we refurbish this helmet. So one of the first things we're going to be doing is fixing the paint. Now, I'm sure you can see there's a lot of cracking in this paint, or what we call orange peel. There's a whole lot of that. In fact, it's pretty rampant, mostly around the brow and then around some of the mandible areas. But you can see here there's a lot of orange peel going on. So that just needs to be fixed. And orange peel comes from a few different factors. The most common factors being using different manufacturers of spray paint. Another could be if you painted it in a high humidity environment, or if you painted it and the paint actually cured too faster than it really had time to settle and set up. There's a lot of different reasons. Those are the most common. Some other things with this helmet specifically, we've got some painting issues here, some more issues with the paint where there's just been overspray, and that overspray has gathered and turned into runs. You can see right there's a really good one. And then, of course, there's some more orange peel going on there. Some more runs. A lot of paint runs down through here. Right here along the transition between the horizontal and vertical visor area. On this side, lots of paint runs. You can see that's just overspraying. That's where they've used way too much paint. Along the dome, you can see several overspray areas around the dome. All these waves right here, just not very good painting. On here, we have a crack that looks like it had been someone tried to fill it. Looks like there might be some Bondo in there. I'm not 100% sure, but we're going to have to fill that crack. We're going to do it with the visor in place. That way the crack will be filled at the shape of the visor, so that when the visor's back in, it won't pull that crack open again, but we'll be using some epoxy on that. Right here you can see a lot of 3D print lines. Right here you can actually see where the paint accents, I should say, accents the 3D print lines. So we need to get rid of those. A lot of overspray again on the back. We're bringing it around here. Lots of overspray. Just a whole lot of overspray. I mean, you can see right there where there's a hole. And the reason why that happened, more than likely, is there was a hole in the 3D print there, and this was oversprayed to the point where you can't even see the transition. I mean, if we flip over to the other side here, at least you can see where the ear goes, but over here you can't even see where the ear ends. I mean, this is complete 3D print lines showing up here. Just a lot of stuff on this helmet. Oh, and here's a good one. On the inside where the visor is, there's wing nuts holding the visor in. So hopefully nobody ever pushes this helmet into somebody's face, or the person who puts this helmet on hopefully doesn't have to worry about these wing nuts scraping their face. So we're actually gonna take those wing nuts out and use some regular regular nuts, or we may even replace that altogether with Chicago screws, but we'll probably just use some regular nuts and maybe cut these bolts down just a little bit. But also, the rangefinder cradle here is up way too high. I mean, that's just crazy high. So we're going to have fun in this tutorial fixing this helmet up so that it can be used, so that it can be approved for a Mandalorian Mercs costume, because in its current shape it would not pass the approval process. So join me in our adventure as we refurbish and repair this 3D printed Mandalorian helmet. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get this paint sanded down. We need to try to get it to a flat surface. The one thing in our favor is that we can potentially use this paint to make this 3D printed surface flat. As we sand it, the paint will, we will be able to sand the paint down to the plastic, and if there's any dips and valleys like there tend to be on 3D prints, then the paint will hopefully fill those in, and then we can prime it with some filler primer and do another sand on it, and we should be able to really make this helmet almost like glass. So we're going to start with that. Once we get it sanded down, then we'll start working on any cracks or anything like that, like this crack over here that I showed you earlier. We'll get that fixed, and then we'll worry about doing our priming and going from there. So what I've got here is I just got my mouse sander, and I'm going to use an 80 grit mouse sanding pad, brand new one. You don't want to use a used one on this. I'm going to lift this camera up just a touch. There we go. And let's get started hogging off material. I've also got a 120 with me for the smaller areas that may not need as much sanding. So let's go ahead and get started. I will likely finish most of this off camera, but we'll go ahead and start it on the camera. Alright, so I just want to go ahead and address the first thing that we found here. And I don't know if this is a layer of spot putty. It looks like it's just been glazed with glazing putty or spot putty. Normally that would be fine on a 3D print, but apparently this one either wasn't sanded enough or there wasn't enough spot putty used. So we're going to have to go through all that as well. Alright, so I started hogging off paint with the mouse sander, but I feel like it might be just going too fast. So I didn't want to chance blowing through too much material here, so I switched over to using my sanding sponge, which I will swear by these little sanding sponges here. You can get them, I get them off Amazon. I think it's like, for like $12 you can get 12 of these, and they go 80 grit, I think it's 180, and then 220 grit. So I'm just using this at this point to get through at least one layer of the paint. I'm not going to try to go through all of this spot putty here, because what happens is, or what was starting to happen, was the spot putty was actually starting to kind of pool and create weird little areas. I just didn't want to, when it gets hot, it coalesces and into like little dots all over the place. Then you got to sand through those, and it's just a cyclical cycle. We don't want to give ourselves more work. This is already going to be a lot of work as it is. So we're just using our sanding sponge. The other cool thing I like about the sanding sponge is that it matches the contour of what you're working on. The other neat thing about them too is that you can wet sand with them, and what I do is and I'm sure you've seen me do this on other videos, I'll just put them in the water, I'll soak up water with them, and I'll start sanding with them, and the water will squeeze out as I'm sanding, and it just makes life a lot easier as you're sanding. Now another thing, that if I'm going to be sanding with a sanding sponge, I'm going to be sanding in these circles. I don't just go one or two different directions. I do a circle. It just leaves a much smoother, even sand. And then I like to brush off my areas This kind of keeps the material from caking up as you're sanding, and also reveals areas that may need more sanding than others. Alright, so we're going to keep sanding this with our sanding sponge. We'll get the dome done, and then we'll move to other areas. Alright, so we have gotten the dome sanded down nice and flat. As you can see, there are no visible print lines on this dome. Our circular sanding with the sponge did a great job with this. So now we're going to work on getting the purple area here, the brow, sanded down. We're going to do that all around. I have a feeling this is probably going to be difficult because of the orange peel being on the brow here. More than likely this paint never adhered to the primer layer or the layer underneath. So you can see some more of that orange peel through there. So more than likely this purple layer never adhered properly or never bonded to the layer below it, which means it's probably going to cake up, and it's going to be real not fun. So I think we're going to wet sand this purple area here, and that's going to give us the kind of surface that we need to move forward with. Alright, so I'm not going to go super in-depth on wet sanding because I've done tutorials on wet sanding. So what I'm going to just basically say is you need some waterproof sandpaper, or basically wet sanding paper. We're using 120 grit, so a pretty heavy grit for this because I really want to get off as much of this purple material as I can, or at least wet sand it down to keep it from caking up. I have a feeling it's going to be it's going to be nasty. So I'm just going to dip my paper in the water here, and just like we did on the dome, we're going to go with a nice round or a nice circular motion, small circles. That's the thing about wet sanding. The reason why you do wet sanding is so the paint doesn't cake up on the paper. And we're going to do this on the whole, everywhere where there's purple. So the whole purple area is going to get wet sanded down. Ultimately, I would like to get all the purple off completely. I'm not necessarily sure if that's possible. But if we wet sand it and get it down enough, then it shouldn't cause any issues with primer. Also, as far as up here on the top of the brow ridge, I'm not really worried about that. I'm mainly worried about what's in front. What's on the largest surfaces of the purple. That's really what I'm worried about. You can see I still have the visor in. I've just left that in. If it needs to be replaced after I'm done, well, that's something that may have to happen. But for the now, it's in there. I want the stability that the visor brings by having it in there. Especially with this being a 3D print. If we were doing this on a resin cast, I'd be less worried. You always want to go back through and feel. That does feel nice and smooth. Once we get this top brow, then we can move down to the mandibles here, which I've actually already started doing a little bit of sanding on those. But I had to stop because I realized that paint had never bonded, and so it was really starting to cake up. So now we're going to start from this side of the ear. Actually, you know what? Let's just start right back here. We'll start on this side here, and then we'll work our way forward. You can see I've already started to sand a little bit on this. A lot of the problems with this paint job that came on this helmet was just a complete lack of detail. I mean, really a lack of patience was put into painting this. And that's something that you sometimes run into. I mean, you know, you can't expect everybody's work to be like your work. So if you buy a used helmet, more than likely you're going to run into some issues that are going to need to be fixed. So just always do your research. Even if this is a brand new helmet, I'd be even more disappointed in it. But do your research, regardless of if it's used, if it's new. Research the shop, ask questions, because you just don't know what you're going to get until you get it and you see it for yourself. But other people who have, used those shops in the past may be able to offer you some insights. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and finish up all of this, getting all this purple off or roughed up, and then we'll go from there. We'll keep moving down the helmet. So let's get this purple done, and we'll come back and take a look at it. So we have went ahead and sanded down the rest of our helmet, and I'm not sure if you can tell. I think you can probably see that the paint job looks much smoother, or the paint as it is now. It's a much smoother surface. Very few, if any, you can't really see any print lines there through the paint because we flattened them all out. You can see where there was originally some print lines right through here. We flattened all those out. We flattened all the print lines in through this ear cap out here. We flattened all the print lines out through here. So we're really ready to take this visor out and do some more work. One thing I want to highlight is right here, this area where we talked about where we're going to have to put some resin. I went and picked at this with an X-Acto knife, and I'm going to hold it up here so you can see. But this was basically filled with Bondo, and that's why there was a crack. That's why there's a crack right up in here, as you can see. There's a crack right there. Let me point that out a little bit better. There we go. So this was all filled with Bondo, with filler, and that's why this crack formed up here. I'm guessing that when they put the screw in, they probably didn't. They used filler in here instead of an actual epoxy that would seal this up and really get in there. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use some XTC 3D to fill this in and fill in this little crack right up here. And then on this side, we've got another little crack. It's right down in there, just a little separation. See if you can see right there. Yep, we're going to fill that in, and we're going to fill this back here in with XTC. But the paint job on the helmet now has been sanded down so that it is nice and flat. And once we primer this and do another, we're probably going to have to prime it a couple times and maybe do a 220 or maybe a 320 wet sand between both layers of primer. But right now, let's go ahead and focus on getting this right here filled in and these areas over here. All right, so here we have our XTC 3D. It is a 2-to-1 mixture, so it's 1 part of B to 2 parts of A, and then I've put some black tint, some black pigment in there, just to blacken it up a bit, so that it matches the filament of the helmet. We're going to mix this up real good. Always make sure you read the instructions on this stuff. The first time I got it, for some reason I wanted to be smart, and I thought it was a 1-to-1 mixture, and it took forever to cure, and it always stayed a little bit tacky, and I ended up having to throw the part away. It is a 2-to-1 mixture, so always make sure you read the instructions. This stuff should be about the viscosity of crude oil. It is self-leveling, so it will get into all the little places you need to get into, and it will stand up. It won't, it's going to off-gas the bubbles, and then it will have a nice flat surface. So I'm going to move this over to right there. I'm leaving the visor in because I want this to be in the position that it would be in with the visor in there. I want this crack to be in that position, so I'm just gonna start loading a bunch of this in. And I know you probably can't see it, but there's actually XTC that has come down into the crack right over here, where my pointer is pointing to. XTC is actually working its way gradually down into this crack, and that's absolutely what you want. So at this point, all we can really do is just wait for that to dry. Once it is cured, we'll be able to sand around there. All right, so I'm going to monitor this, and as soon as it is kicked, we'll be able to do our sanding in here, so we can feather that out and make that look like it's supposed to, just like it's the actual original area. So we've let our epoxy dry that we did over here. We used the XTC from Smooth On to fill this in where we had a pretty big crack going on. And the next thing we did after that was we went ahead and we just put some filler in here, just regular body filler. That's just Bondo, standard regular Bondo you can pick up at any auto parts store. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use this 60 grit sponge here, sanding sponge, and we're just going to sand this down to get it nice and flush. And you notice I still haven't taken the visor out of this helmet. That'll come soon. But I want it in there now just for the extra, just for that extra support that it gives. Alright, so what we want to do here is, after you've sanded it there just a little bit, it's starting to get flush. I'm just going to go in circles here. Now let's go back to just using the edge. And we'll go back to circles. What I'm doing is I'm basically going in different directions so that it feathers that edge. So that edge is nice and it's nice and flush. That looks good. Alright, perfect. Now let's go over here to this side. And as you can see, we filled up those two holes. There was a hole on that side and a hole on this side. I'm just going to use my X-Acto knife here to just sort of cut away gently. I'm using a screwdriver here, just a flathead screwdriver, to sort of true up this surface here and make this nice and properly shaped. And what this does is it just scrapes up what we don't need without removing what we do need. And be careful you don't uncover those holes again. Now I'm just pushing it towards the hole, kind of packing it in, and then I'm just lifting up here, and that pulls off the excess. Alright, now we're going to use our sandpaper here, or our sponge, since it's going to get in there nicely. Alright, so that takes care of all the places that we had to fill. So now we can go ahead and take the visor out of here. We're going to replace these wing nuts. We'll keep the screws, but we'll toss the wing nuts because those things are just, that's going to be murder on your face. Actually, I had a really good reaction on my Facebook page when I posted a picture of these in, with the wing nuts, the visor in, and everybody's like, oh my god. You know, is somebody trying to add scars to their face? What's the deal? I kind of get it. Alright, so let's pop this out. We want to continue to be able to use this visor, so... There you go. Gotta get behind it, and then pull it. There we go. And once you do that, it's out. So this visor's still very good. Just needs a good wipe down, but it's still a good visor. Alright, so now that we got the visor out, I just want to look around and see how things look. Like I said before, we're going to continue to use these screws. They should be fine. We're just going to trade in these wing nuts for bolts, and we're going to get some small washers for down here. I'm going to keep everything looking the same. But for the most part, the helmet, I believe, is, at this point, we could probably go ahead and prime it if we wanted to. That would, we would be at that point. And then we're going to need to do a bunch more wet sanding when we prime it. Well, I don't want to say a bunch more. We're going to have to do some more wet sanding. My goal is to get about 3 layers of primer on this helmet. Before we do that, there's still some things that need to be dealt with. There's still print lines on here that need to be dealt with. Same for right here. There's actually a whole bunch of print lines. So what we'll do is after we prime this, we'll go back over this and wet sand it some more. Because you're not going to get these print lines out fully by dry sanding. I mean, right here, there's even raised fringe right here that needs to be scraped off. And when I say fringe, it means that it's a little bit of 3D print, a little bit of filament. There's kind of a tail that it leaves right in here. Well, on any surface, there's sort of like a little raised area. So you really want to take care of that. All right, so I'm going to add some primer to this. It's going to be our next step. All right, so we have primed our helmet. And I'm going to show you the primer here we used. I used a Rust-Oleum sandable primer. It's just a flat black. You can also get it in gray. I got it in black because we're covering up existing paint and we didn't completely strip the paint off. So the black pretty much guarantees a nice new fresh surface. The gray sometimes will be darker or lighter depending on what color may be under it if you're covering up existing colors. So with black, there's no chance of that. It's black no matter what. Dark black, light black, it's all black. So we have primed this helmet, and I went ahead and did a wet and a dry sand over it just to go ahead and get out what was left of the print lines. Now let's take a good look at this close up. You're going to see where I went through here, and that was I basically sanded all the way down through here so I could level these places out because they were just not level with the current paint that was on there. And then some definitely difficult areas here where right here at the inside of the visor area, as you can see, we're still going to have to hit that up with some more primer. This is just the first, basically the first layer of primer, where there will be another couple layers on top of this. There's the inside of the vertical T area. Can't really see the print lines anymore there. We sanded those down nicely. We'll keep going around here. We had print lines in the front. You can't see any of those anymore. Around the dome, print lines are gone. Around the ears, there were some at the cheeks. Around this upper level, where the upper and lower level of the cheeks meet. No more print lines. No more up here. You could see print lines originally. Those are gone. All of the visible print lines at this point are gone. The only place where you might still see some is right here at the bottom of the ear caps. But other than that, pretty much gone. I did sand around the bottom as well. Down through here, you can still see those print lines around the bottom of the rim, but you're not really going to see that once the helmet is on. And I'm not really concerned with what's going on in the helmet. I really just am worried about the outside of the helmet. So now that we've done that, we've got our first layer of primer on, we're going to go ahead and put another layer of primer on. And, oh, one thing before we get that far, let's look at the areas that we filled up. So let me bring the camera down here a bit. So let's look at our fill areas here. So we filled this area. You can't even tell that it's been filled. And it looks perfect. And then let's go over to here. Remember we had some holes around the ears here? Well, you can't see those anymore because they're filled up. Doesn't even look like there was ever any issues there. So we are definitely in a much better spot with this helmet than we were. So let's go ahead and we're gonna put some more primer on this, another couple layers, and then I'm not going to. Well, we'll check. We'll look between the. We'll look at the next layer of primer, and we'll see if we need to do another sand. But we may not have to do another sand. We may just be able to just prime this at this point, and it'd be good to go since everything is nice and even. All of our low spots and high spots are now evened out with the primer that we've used. So let's do that. We'll come back and we'll look at the ear cap over here and see what we can do about getting that fixed up. So we put our second coat of primer on the helmet, and let's just take a quick look at it here. We may not need to put a third coat of primer down. Primer looks really even. The helmet itself looks really even. I'm not seeing any semblances of print lines, even right there under ears where it typically see print lines. But all this is looking really nice and smooth. So let's wipe this down. I just have a blue paper towel, a shop towel here. I'm just going to wipe this down just to get any overspray residue off of here, which that happens because I do paint outside, especially because of that. Some pollen may have settled on it in the short time it was out there. I just want to get all the impurities off. We also got our bottom taken care of here, our rim around the bottom. See, it's much smoother than it was. So that's taken care of all the way around this. Alright, so now that this helmet is wiped down, the next thing we want to do is focus on right up here at the ears. Now, when I got this helmet, the ear cap on this thing was mounted way up here. Way, way, way up here. And there's actually a holes already in there that I'm guessing were part of the 3D print. Now, the reality is we want the ear cap down here. Okay, we want it flush with the top of the lower ear. So we want this. This is the cradle for the rangefinder. So this is a rangefinder cradle. Another thing that needs to happen to this cradle, it needs to be sanded down. It's still got all the print lines, as you can see. All those print lines are still there, and there's even a misprint area there that we need to fill in. So we still got some work. So let's go ahead and we're going to put the helmet over here to the side, and let's start sanding this. So I'm just going to go straight to 60 grit. I'm not really worried about the inside here because that's going to be glued to the helmet. If you just go one direction, you actually don't get rid of the print lines. You want to go multiple directions because it'll sand this from different directions, and it pushes the, as it heats the filament will spread out into those grooves. Alright, that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead, we're going to go ahead and let's hit this with some primer, which we can do in here. Now, I didn't fill that little bit in there because I'm just not sure that it needs it right yet. I want to see how we look after a good sand. We may not need it after we get this piece primed and sanded. So we're going to let this dry. We're going to come back to it, and we'll go ahead and adhere it to the helmet. And we'll look and we'll see if we need to do any more sanding. We'll need more cleanup sanding, and if not, we'll adhere it to the helmet. Because I'm going to use... We will have to re-drill this hole, by the way. So I'm going to use both super glue to give it a nice instant sort of quick bond. Then I'm going to use E6000 to give it a permanent bond. So how I do this is I just go around the outside lightly with the super glue. Not super concerned with getting it all the way up to the top because it's simply not going to get that far up. And then quickly we add on our E6000 to the center. Of course, you want to go around the hole. You're going to be real careful too, because that super glue will bond to you if you're not. Just like that. And you will get it all over the place, I'm telling you, if you're not careful. So be very patient. Make sure you line it up so it's nice and centered. Just going to give it a little pressure here. Now it should actually be, yep, it's already bonded on there. The super glue is almost completely bonded. Alright, so we're going to let that bond on there real quick. And then after it's cured, after we're sure that it's cured, we're going to, see it's still a little tacky here. After we're sure this has completely cured, we will then drill our hole, and we'll prime out, we'll respray this part of the side of the helmet over here so that this is primed out as well. Alright, so now that we've got our ear cap completed, fixed up, we've painted it, we've done a sand on it to make it nice and smooth, we've got all the print lines out of it, no more print lines, and we've even gotten our actual ear cap. So we got the cradle done, we've got the ear cap here done. We went ahead and painted that, sanded it, got all the print lines out of that. It's just primed. And also, we needed a rangefinder, so I actually had an old Clone Wars style rangefinder from a previous helmet. I believe it was from a Night Owl style helmet. And that fit perfect. I had to mod the stock just a little bit, but it works just perfectly. And this is just an example of what it will look like when it's all put together. But that is basically how it's going to look once we're finished. Now, the next step we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and put the silver, paint this metallic silver or an aluminum. I think it's actually, the paint that I have is called silvery aluminum. So we're going to hit it with that. We're going to hit all these pieces with it. And we'll come back and we'll take a look at our helmet that at that point will be pretty much ready to paint. We won't be painting it. I'm going to be sending it back to the actual owner for them to do that. But we're going to get it nice and silver for them so that all they have to do is start painting over the top of that. So we'll be right back, and we'll look at it, at how this looks now with the metallic layer on it. So we have covered our helmet with a silvery metallic aluminum. It's got a nice sparkle. As you can see, there's no print lines on this. No cracks, no air holes, no gaps, no nothing. This is just a perfect helmet. And it is ready for the visor to be reinstalled. Alright, so we've got our visor. This was the visor that came out of the helmet. It's in decent shape. We're going to reuse it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to turn the bucket towards me. Since the hole's already pre-made in this, we just literally have to put it back in the holes that was already in. Just like that. Perfect. Now, this time, we're not using wing nuts that are going to stab people in the face. We're using just regular nuts. So let me get the camera in here. Start out over here. I got a washer. There's still a wee bit of the bolt right here, but to be perfectly honest, it's very little. It's not enough for me to be concerned about. It's not enough to stab anybody in the face because the cheeks here, you've got the cheeks, and the cheeks come up enough to keep that off your face. T-visor successfully installed with regular nuts this time instead of wing nuts. Much safer. Looks better. Here we have our helmet. It is all assembled at this point. We've got the rangefinder on. The ear cap is not permanently attached, but it is attached just for filming purposes. It's basically just sitting there. It could fall off at any time. But we've got this thing painted silver. It's ready to start painting when the lucky client gets this back. They'll be able to start painting it, And all fears that they had in the past of whether or not they'd be able to use this helmet are pretty much gone at this point. It is a blank canvas for painting. It is absolutely approvable for Mando Merc's Costume Club use. So, yeah, that's where we're at with it. It wasn't a difficult restoration. It was a I mean, it did take time. It probably took, all in all, probably about a week's worth of work from start to finish, because we had to take a lot of the original paint down. We had to do a lot of pre-sanding before we even got our primer on there. But once we were able to get the sanding done and get the print lines gone with our primer and some light sanding, then we're pretty much good to go. I mean, we did have some places that we had to fill up. You know, we had some places around the ears on this side over here. We had the spots over here we had to fill up. We had over here at where the eye, or where the edge of the visor area right here that was cracked. We had to fill that full of resin and re-adhere that together. It was cracked all the way through. But those were the biggies. Really, that was probably one of the biggest issues we had, was getting that filled up and back to good order. So yeah, so this has been a 3D printed helmet restoration from, we'll call it from rags to riches, because that's basically what we've done here. Is we've taken a helmet that was really a piece of junk, and we turned it into something really nice. The only reason it was a piece of junk is because it was never finished well in the first place. And that, you know, if you don't finish a 3D printed helmet properly, it just makes more of a hassle for you to have to go back and do it. You know, and you never want to pass off a piece of work, especially when you're selling it, as being done and being ready to be quote unquote Merc's approved in, because I can guarantee you, if somebody in the approval team saw that helmet close up, it would not be approvable. In the right light, those print lines will glare, and they'll kick it back. So, anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this helmet restoration. I know I have. I'll look forward to shipping this back over to the UK, and I'm sure that the Forever home is waiting to get it back. The Foundling's ready to get it back and start trooping, get it painted up so they can start trooping. So anyway, thanks for joining me for this. We'll be back next month with another Warmaster's Workshop. And until then, thanks for all my supporters. You make this possible. And we will see you next month back in the Warmaster's Workshop. Thanks for coming out.